I think we're going to start because we want to finish the event in 1 hour, and it's a big pleasure for me to introduce this panel. First of all, let me say thank you for StrategEast for gathering us all together to address a very important issue and having such a distinguished panel to talk about the role of technological innovation in the context of the current COVID-19 crisis. We have a very interesting participants today to talk about this topic. We have Tomaika Telemann from New America Foundation, Heiko Sanderman from EPAM, the head of digital engagement practices and vice president of EPAM. We have Omri Segev-Moyal, CEO of cybersecurity company Profero and co-founder and VP of research at Minerva Labs, who is responsible for development of one of the major crisis-related applications in Israel. And finally, we have Mariam Lashki, Deputy Chairperson at Georgia's Innovation and Technology Agency. So we have a very interesting and distinguished panel, but let me first, to start with some very brief remarks about the role of technological innovation in order to frame our discussion, because it seems that every type of crisis, in particular this crisis, is a time of accelerated innovation in order to address the crisis as well as the new reality that created by this crisis. In particular, this type of crisis, which keeps us at home, really requires a lot of different type of innovation in order to support a new type of lifestyle that we have. So we can distinguish between a number of different types of innovation that we can see. First is obviously the innovation that directly related to the crisis. So if it's about development of new medical solutions and new technologies and new tests to address the virus, etc. We also have a lot of different type of innovation that support the new modes of life and activity of people in the current environment. If it's about food, if it's about remote working and other aspects of our communication, including the way we communicate right now. A very important aspect of innovation is obviously engagement of people in response to crisis. And we can see on the one hand, participation of people in order to provide different type of equipment in order to support medical teams, including a very active participation of so-called makers, the 3D printers that produce different type of PPE. But we also can see a lot of different forms of facilitation of mutual aid based on engagement of hyperlocal communities, if it's about development of dedicated platforms or creation of just a different type of groups on existing messengers and Facebook groups. But the general problem is the problem of not only information overload, but also innovation overload. And the major challenges is really how to support the right solutions, how to connect between the right actors that develop innovation and those that need this innovation. So these are quite big challenges, which is not only about how to develop innovation, but also how to implement this innovation. And for that purpose, we have a really very distinguished speakers right now with us today that are going to share their work on this field, share their insights, and then hopefully to address some of the questions that are going to be raised by participants. You will be able to write the questions in the comments, and then I will read these questions. And you're also able to raise the hand as well, but hopefully we will manage it first of all based on the comments in the questions. So, and without further ado, let me first introduce our first speaker, again, Tomaika Telemann, Digital Impact and Governance Initiative Director at New America Foundation. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you and honored to have a part in this important discussion today. I'd like to begin with a story, and these are stories from the United States, but frankly, they could be drawn from many countries around the world. The first is of an individual who wanted to apply for unemployment benefits and was told that he needed to find a fax machine in order to do so. It could also be the story of a single mother in the US state of Arizona who is still waiting for a stimulus check that will be delivered in paper form weeks and weeks after it was supposed to have arrived, and she needs that money to feed her family. Or it could be of the thousands of others that are waiting for access to different forms of government services or resources, but have been denied access to those services because the technology systems that are supposed to provide them have failed. This is a monumental challenge that we are facing. And what we are seeing, although this was certainly true before the crisis, is that in many countries around the world, people are relying on institutions designed in the 19th century and technology from the 20th century in order to try and solve what is a very 21st century crisis. And frankly, things aren't going that well. We need a better way of doing business. There is happily a better way of doing business out there. We've seen a number of countries, including a number of countries in Central and Eastern Europe, pioneer the use of next generation integrated technology platforms to power their public institutions. But this remains a pretty isolated phenomenon, and we think that it needs to spread very quickly. One of the reasons we think it needs to spread very quickly is that if you look at the countries that are doing, in general estimations, the best job responding to this crisis, or jurisdictions like South Korea, Singapore, Taiwan, Estonia, the one thing they all tend to have in common is that they are utilizing these next generation technology platforms to power their governments. That is a huge advantage when it comes time to channeling information, resources, and people where they need to go. And we think it's something that needs to become the norm around the world. Our organization came together with our partners at the Rockefeller Foundation at an amazing center they have in Bellagio, Italy, just short of 2 years ago. And we brought in heads of government, some of the world's leading open source technologists, and we mapped out what these systems should look like. You have some foundational layers around digital identity, data exchanges like the X-Road system in Estonia, and digital payments. And then you need a variety of applications that can plug into that foundation and some governance and oversight to ensure that those systems are used properly. We're now working within our organization on developing the platforms you see on top, the application layers. And there are other organizations like the Gates Foundation that are building out some of the more foundational elements of this stack. But ultimately, we believe these tools need to be available on an open source basis for jurisdictions around the world. What does this look like in practice? Well, we have partnerships with many different organizations because this is a job that's much too big for us to do alone. And the way to think of our work is sort of as the general contractor bringing together partners and technology providers in order to build out these open source systems. We've been working with the state of New Jersey in the United States to create a career and a jobs platform that will help individuals who are out of work gain access to employment. That platform is now live, and residents within the state are using it to help recover economically from the crisis. We also have worked with New Jersey to develop an emergency platform to connect the children of essential workers with emergency childcare in the immediate aftermath of the closure of childcare centers in that state as a result of the crisis. We partnered with the World Bank, MIT, and EY in an effort called the Prosperity Collaborative to develop new platforms around taxation and public finance. Some time ago, we did a project with Georgia, and I'll give a special shout out to both Georgia and Ukraine that have been leaders in this field. And Georgia's land registry, which we collaborated on, along with a firm called Bitfury, has now been recognized as one of the best in the world by the World Bank. The Prozoro platform for procurement in Ukraine is another outstanding example of how you can use open source technology platforms to build in more accountability, efficiency, and transparency to government services. And we're collaborating with New York City on data wallets and the State Department and Department of Justice on revenue tracking platforms that will make it easier to ensure resources are moved efficiently and responsibly. This is, of course, just the tip of the iceberg of the work that needs to be done in the face of this crisis. And so we have launched on GitHub a new repository called the Pandemic Response Repository that pulls together open source projects from around the world that different governments are utilizing in order to respond to the crisis, And we're seeing this have an impact in real time. For example, on the left, you'll see the coronavirus information hub that was developed by the state of New Jersey as an open source public good. And on the right is, aside from a few formatting changes, an almost identical platform that's been deployed by the state of Alabama that used the open source code from New Jersey and is now helping citizens in Alabama communicate with their government more effectively. Ultimately, we believe that those of us who care about building more effective institutions need to build 80% technology platforms that can be deployed around the world, with the hope that governments will be able to customize the last 20% to meet their specific needs. And so in the face of this crisis, we are accelerating our efforts to build those solutions and the repositories that will help share them. We're developing principles and research that will enable governments to use these platforms responsibly. And there are, as we would all expect, significant issues of equity and privacy that come into play as these systems are utilized. And we are on track to build partnerships that will enable 100 million people around the world to benefit from these platforms by 2024. We think that work needs to accelerate if it's going to be successful. Unprecedented crises tend to lay the groundwork for unprecedented reforms. We believe this is an unprecedented crisis, and we hope that it will lead to a renaissance in the way that we utilize technology to power our public institutions going forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This is a really very brief but comprehensive and a very interesting presentation. I think this really provides us some kind of framework for our further discussion. And now let me give the space to Heiko Sanderman from EPAM, the VP of EPAM and the head of digital engagement practice there, that is going to share some information about their initiatives and their experience of the development of projects related to COVID-19. Heiko, if you can unmute your microphone, because we are not able to hear you.
Thanks for telling me. So thanks for having me, first of all. It's an honor to be part of this panel. Let me quickly, if you could give me a second so that I can pull up the presentation, because I was actually thinking that you would share that on your end. It's only going to be
sure, no problem.
Literally a couple of seconds. Okay.
I should remind participants that they're able to write the questions during the presentations, and if you have questions, you can share them right now, but I'm going to read all the questions in the end of the presentations. So the floor is yours.
So tell me whether you can see the presentation that I'm sharing.
Yes, we can.
Super. So as you said correctly, I'm Heiko Sanderman, Vice President at EPAM. Just to a little correction, so I'm actually Head of Digital Engagement Practice for Financial Services, which the reason why I'm mentioning this is because it might be relevant for what I'm sharing with you, because data privacy, as you can imagine, especially in financial services, and first and foremost when you're sitting in Switzerland like I do, is a very important topic. Now, how does that relate to COVID, and what did we approach, or how did we approach the problem at EPAM? So first and foremost, let me give you some background to drag you along with our thinking. So I think we all have seen that the current crisis has put in governments, healthcare organizations, and individuals in a dilemma. I think on the one hand, obviously, we want to protect ourselves, or government wants to protect their citizens. And on the other hand, obviously, we are all interested in protecting our freedom and the well-beings of our economy. And the same is true for me personally, for everybody, for every individual. So I would like, obviously, to isolate myself and to protect myself, and at the same time, avoid that I'm unknowingly harming others by spreading the virus. And on the right-hand side of the slide, is the other part of the goal is, as a government, obviously, I'm interested to keep up the economy. I want to ensure that that I'm not completely breaking down the economy. And as a personal individual, I'm obviously interested to live my life as normally as possible, even in these crisis situations. And I think what we've seen is, at least in European countries and countries like the US, that the pendulum currently is very much on the left-hand side of this picture. So we're literally seeing whole countries being locked down. Billions of people are currently restricted from their normal freedom. We're seeing those very strict lockdowns in Europe where people are not allowed to go out. And just to let me emphasize this, I believe that is exactly the right thing to do in the current situation. So I'm not challenging that these measures are overdone or anything. I think it is the right thing to do. And nevertheless, as we live through this crisis, we need to now look ahead and see what will happen in the future. And is there a possibility to find middle ground to actually achieve both ends of the goal that I outlined here? And I think we all have seen a lot in the press recently about flattening the curve strategy, and I think by now most of the population should be very much aware of what flattening the curve is. I think the new important currency that we all have learned about is ICUs, so intensive care units. And if the goal of the current measures is to avoid that the peak of these curve is not exceeding the ICU capacity of the various countries, then I have to say, for looking in the future, this can be a dominant strategy. And I just pulled up one example of modeling out here. I think we have very similar ones from Harvard University, from the Imperial College, and so on. And what all of these models are telling us, and I'm not an epidemiologist, but I trust that these models are well thought through, and we all know that not one of these models is the correct one, but the whole available models out there, they all show us that there is a continuum of possibilities, and in this continuum of possibilities, we see that in every possible scenario, the flatten the curve strategy will lead to lockdowns, which will need to be kept up for 8 months to 2 years. So what we're currently seeing, the situation that we're in is, or we're in that situation because we lost control. The cases went up high and we weren't able to follow containment strategies. So most countries moved out of the containment strategy into the so-called mitigation strategy, which is really just to prevent that these curves are peaking, and that we're not seeing scenarios like we sadly saw them in Italy or Spain, where health workers had to do triage of patients and had to decide who might be eligible for getting the intensive care unit that he needs. Now, the question is, how can we, since I think we all must agree that the alternative of keeping the lockdowns open for 8 months to keep the intensive care units available for everybody can't be the strategy, because it will mean, or it will lead to a complete meltdown of economy. So I think that what we believe at EPAM is that we need to enable economies and governments to move back into the so-called containment phase, which means back to the situation where we can track individual infection chains, where we can track where we can isolate individual cases, which will then lead to the fact that the rest of the population can more or less lead a normal life, and the economies will be able to open up again. Now, the problem is, the key question here is, how can we, so what is the right number of cases where we believe we can track those those infection chains? And in most countries, we saw that the cases went up too high, and it's impossible for for the governments to actually track those infection chains. So I think the lockdowns must be kept open to bring the numbers down to a level where the individual tracking of infection change is again possible. And at that point, we see that technology can be a measure of helping to increase the threshold of cases for which the tracking is again possible. And our solution to that is, I know that this has been discussed widely in various countries, and most prominently probably Singapore or South Korea. The idea is really to build an application to use the widespread usage of mobile phones, and to build an application which is able to mimic the transmission of the virus using your mobile phones via Bluetooth technology. Again, we see that these concepts are being discussed very, very actively in various countries, and we're just one of the players out there that believes that we can offer or help to find a solution to this problem. So we developed this framework of Bluetooth tracking and the whole app framework, and open sourced it, and we're in discussions with various countries and health organizations as we speak, providing our expertise and help in this area. As I said, we don't believe that our solution is the only one, as the previous spokesperson has said, Mr. Tillerman. We believe that we are one of the companies that are providing the base technology for this, plus the capacity to tailor to the specific need if that is wished for. And we're very happy to collaborate with other initiatives out there. We actively reached out to most of them at this time, and offering our help, especially when it comes to thinking this further. Not only the Bluetooth tracking app that is in discussion, but also how can we use this application to help government to people communication, and how can we do this in a collaborative way between us people. So the use cases that we're covering is more or less, we have these the three actors in this one. That's the general public, so every individual, health workers and authorities. And I think the application offers support for all three of these actors. And the way that it works is more or less, people will be able to download the application. The application will track the counters between users, and if one of the users falls ill and he's positively tested, or the health authorities flag him as suspicious or infected, there's a consent request sent to the user asking him, is he willing to share the contact data, and the contact data can then be used to inform the other users of this application, which again will help to track the infection chains and so on. And we do believe that this is technologies like these will be, from our perspective, currently the only way that will enable us to actually pursue both goals, protecting our people and opening up the economies. I think I'll leave the rest for the later of the discussion, and happily handing over to the next speaker.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for sharing your concept and your insights. And I think that's a very interesting and good connection to the next speaker. And our next speaker is Omri Segev-Muyal, CEO of cybersecurity company Profero. So he joins us from Israel. And actually, as I understand, Mr. Muyal is responsible for development of one of the most successful applications in Israel that's called HaMagen, which kind of also focus on this topic of informing and alerting people about potential risk. So please, Omri, if you can join us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Just a little correction. We are not responsible of the development of HaMagen. Our company was in charge of overseeing security and privacy of the project. So just a little correction.
Sure, thank you.
Yeah, so just a bit of background on HaMagen, if you haven't heard about it. It's the contact tracing application that was developed by the Ministry of Health, matrix system, and a bunch of very awesome volunteers that jumped in on the wagon, helping the government produce an app with over 1.5 million downloads in less than a week, which is pretty amazing. We got introduced to the project on something that wasn't really told yet on media or anything, but when the app was first introduced internally, even the people at the Ministry of Health were a bit of worried downloading it to their mobile phones. If you're aware, in Israel, there's a lot of, can you guys hear me well?
Sorry?
I was asking if you can hear me well.
Yeah, great.
Cheers. So basically, people were worried to download their own app because there's a lot of anti-democracy movement in Israel. The Israeli internal investigation, the Shin Bet, was introduced to help track patients. So there's a lot of emergency rules that were applied, and people were worried. And even the people internally in the Ministry of Health didn't know what exactly is this app. Was it developed by the government? What it actually does? I don't want it on my phone. So the Ministry of Health contacted us and says, can you help us do two things? One, can you audit the application and make sure that there's actually no data that's been transmitted to anyone other than the owner of the app itself. So nothing is being transmitted, but also that it's very secure. So we work with them. The architecture is actually pretty neat. It's actually not that sophisticated once you figure it out. There is a single point, and you can call it a server. It's an Azure bucket for the technical people, where there's one single location where all the data of what the epidemiologic team have been observed. For example, a patient, he was interviewed that he was in X location during that time, etc., or if some things that were analyzed by the Shin Bet is being uploaded there. And what happens when you download the app, it's starting to collect your location, Wi-Fi, and also soon Bluetooth encrypted of the people you were next to, and which also have this app. And it's tracking that. But the main idea behind it is none of this location data, Wi-Fi data, and in the future Bluetooth data is not going to be uploaded like many of the other apps, like the Singaporean app, the Chinese app, and others. It's not going to be uploaded to some central location. Everything is kept on the device. What the device actually does is going to that server and only grabbing what the Ministry of Health is sharing regarding where other people were, which is kind of cool. So it's basically, instead of the Facebook way, the Google way, and other apps way of basically getting whatever they can collect on people, everything is kept on the device. It's also not going to be keeping any more data than maybe between 14 to 21 days. It's going to be introduced in the next version. So it's very privacy by design, and it's very secured. And another thing that's really important about this app, which is, I think it's one of the building blocks if you want to really build something that is, let's say, have privacy by design approach, is that it's open source. It's complete open source. Everybody can go, everybody can use it. It's even on MIT-based license, so everybody can use it as well, as long as they keep it as MIT. I'm not a lawyer, but kind of this is what MIT, let's say, give or take means, which is also good because the government was willing to share and let everybody else use it, but not let anyone kind of misuse it for commercial usage. So if you do want to use it, you got to make your license MIT as well, which I think it's kind of good as well. Another thing that I think is really important and really showed kind of like how this can be successful is that the Ministry of Health, unlike some other ministries in Israel, realized that without voluntarily approach in a kind of like, at least in a democratic country, and even not in a democratic countries, but just a second, sorry.
I can't tell if you want to work.
So Alexa, stop. Sorry about that. So basically, if you're not acting voluntarily, unless you have some kind of really intensive infrastructure like in China, where you can't get on the train without government app, when you can't go to the malls, you can't drive without this app, it's not going to work. You need people to be willingly taking part in this. And this was the true main success. And how you get people to take part, to volunteer, is by keeping their privacy, making everything visible, being honest on what is going on, asking the public, if either technical people, QA people, or even for translation. In Israel, as you're aware, there is three main languages, Hebrew, English, and Arabic, but there's also a lot of Russian people, people speaking Amharic, and etc. So French, and they also been involved and translated the app. So it's kind of cool to see how those even small thing that happen. Another thing really important is that this app was kind of like a counter-strike against other initiatives that were trying to be formed during that time. Maybe even giving the Shin Bet more rights or the police more rights, or even blocking some of the things, that it gives a better sense of, for the people, for what everybody is actually more worried right now is the second strike or the second stage. I'm not sure how it's called in English, but when people will start go out, there are going to be small outbreaks. And if a lot of people use this app, it might be, it should be a really good resource to minimize the second stage impact. So those are the couple of things. And one last very important thing, I think, at least in Israel, this is the first time the government take a full approach on an open source project, which is unique because it's been through harsh times. It's been to a time where usually government tends to close and take their own decisions and not consult with the public, which we see in many other countries, also in Israel to some extent. And then we have a project where the community is involved, the privacy community is involved, the security community is involved, the ministries are involved, and at least quite a biased perspective of mine, it was quite successful.
Thank you very much. These are very interesting insights, particularly about the fact that it was the first open source project that was supported by the government, and generally about this kind of structure of mobilization about the project. So let me give the space and the stage for our last but not the least speaker, our distinguished guest from Georgia, Deputy Chairperson of Georgia's Innovation and Technology Agency, Maryam Lashki. And Georgia was already mentioned today as one of the successful cases of innovation. And it's really important for us to hear about the Georgian experience of development of different type of innovative solutions in response to the current crisis.
Thank you very much. I'm very honored and happy to be part of the panel session, and I'm very happy to hear such good findings out of the panel sessions by my colleagues, and happy to continue this process, not to be only this panel, but to continue this process and be systematic and work together. Because nowadays, as we see, more and more hands-on-hand approaches are becoming useful, and we have to stand together to fight against the global challenge, as it's called now, the coronavirus, the black swan of 2020. So it definitely has changed the globe, and as you have mentioned in your opening remarks, it definitely has accelerated the process of world developing. So global is becoming definitely an agile, structured startup. Those who are adapting are succeeding, and who are not are left behind. And in nowadays world, we cannot just agree that the same term and status of the countries for developed countries with a strong medical system and developing or underdeveloped countries may not remain as it is. So now we have the different challenge, and the world is becoming, and also the countries are becoming differently. I have to adjust and say that the COVID has transformed the whole globe in a startup regime. And at the same time, we have 195 startups, like countries, those who are searching for the business models of recovery. So now those who are having the entrepreneurial mindset are succeeding. We can agree that the entrepreneurial mindset is not only useful for those who are leading the entrepreneurship, or those who are the CEOs or founders of startups, but the entrepreneurial mindset in nowadays world especially is needed for the governments and the ones who are making the decisions and those who are leading this process. So if we do have the entrepreneurial mindset, and if we can adjust to the existing challenges and transform it to the opportunities, then we are kind of in a good track of the development. World is changing, and it's time for the shared economy and time for the open source and hands-on-hand economy. It was well mentioned by my colleagues how useful it is to have the open source approach in order to together fight against this challenge. We see that the tech companies are now becoming stronger and stronger, and if we can kind of put the status of the developed countries to those tech corporations who are now coming forward as the crucial players in the response to the coronavirus crisis. The past few days have brought a flurry of announcements from the tech companies volunteering to join the wartime mobilization against the virus. The big three cloud vendors, the lucrative business at Amazon, Google, and Microsoft, are devoting to storing and analyzing data for customers. Also, we see that the IBM, for instance, is helping the White House to provide the supercomputing power to searchers trying to understand and stop the spread of COVID-19, as well as Amazon has Amazon's AWS put the 20 million fund, and we see also lots of major actions from MIT or from others who are putting the open source or volunteering to support these global challenges. We see the tendency that especially the medical technology startups are putting forward on this first row of the war, so to say, with the COVID. And we see, for instance, the Aaron startup, who is like a drone-based medical suppliers delivery, or the healthcare code AI supporting applications for health workers during these epidemics, and so on and so forth. So we also see that on the one hand, we have the existing startups who are coming up with the new solutions or expanding their services and products. And also a lot of the new startups are coming up with the innovative solutions. COVID has the impact critical indicators and to the stages itself. We see especially the social indicator. Also, we see that this business is not the same. We also see that the global value chain is changing and distracting. And now we see more and more importance of technological absorption and the business model adaptation. As of the representative of Georgia as a citizen, and thanks for acknowledging the rapid progress of Georgia with regards to the innovation. Thanks to Tamika, and I'm very happy to hear that you were also involved in the process of transforming Georgia's, so to say, blockchain system with regards to the land registration, as well as mentioning the Bitfury's largest investment in the country from the perspective of a Bitcoin development. I have to be proud of being representative of Georgia without being there representing the governmental entity. But I have to say that the risk assessment and mitigation plan and rapid response to this rapid response to this challenge was the major success of Georgia currently. We have the statistics. So of course, it's not major comparing to others, but at this point we have 104 recovered people and only 5 deaths, which is also definitely very sad. But on the other side, comparing to the population, still this is kind of, we see that the government as well as other players are managing this process. And I'm very happy that WHO acknowledged and assessed Georgia's readiness highly. So state emergency, all of the key actions, which was from January when we first heard about this pandemic expansion in China, we have the also timeline where each of the months and each of the parts of the months we had rapid responses with announcing the state emergency, locking down the educational system, public spaces, and so on and so forth. So this was having the prompt reaction to this and analyzing that this was serious. Of course, for people like, I have to say as well that sometimes people are comparing Georgians to Italians with, how to say, the characteristics. And here we also had people who were kind of not taking attention to this virus, but in this case, the rough and tough response by the governmental coordination unit was very crucial and important. As a representative of JITA Innovation Agency, I have to mention few steps forward, which we have adjusted in this short time of period. On the one side, we are trying to kind of disrupt the imported products and develop the local production, starting from the facial mask, test swabs, and others. So we are using intensively the 3D printing in order to meet the expectations of our local disease center and getting the challenges which they are facing, and we are working on that. On the other side, we have announced so-called Coronathon, the hackathon for those who are meeting the those who are putting the solutions for the innovative solutions for the coronavirus, starting from the retail sector as well as medical sector, and also monitoring and evaluation process. And we have good results in this direction. We also have startups, for instance, who are working on the medical solution like biophages to solve, to have the kind of pills for against the coronavirus. And now we see that the government and the private sector together with the community are working very closely. So here we have the people are saying, at last I want to kind of say that people here, lots of the people and also from the governments, we hear that we have to live together with COVID, and we have to continue this process. And therefore, I just wanted to give like few useful parts of the receipt in order to move forward and live with it. First pillar and most important is do not do kind of because lots of the community members are panicking, and those who were saying that causing of their business development was because of the governments or others. Now they are saying that because of the COVID they cannot work, which is not true. You do not have to say that because of the COVID we have paused our activities. You have to continue in a new way. So we have to say that we are continuing to work, but in a new way. We have to look at the challenges. The second one is we have to look at the challenges as an opportunities. And I'm sure that smart money is being on place on markets, and more like smart investors who are using this as an opportunities are continuing to invest. And then we have the smart innovators who are bringing the innovative solutions. Third one is a coordination. Coordination is very useful, and we have coordination units, and it's not of having in coordination units the useful people, but it's more to have the leaders. Maybe by position they are not on the right ones, but if they have the experience or they have the will to support, they have to be in these coordination units. The fourth one is to be as fast as possible, as fast as they have never been, and to conduct the design thinking exercises like every day. We have to kind of reshape our minds and adjust to the needs. Fifth is the execution, because without execution, only the visions and ideas are just hallucinations. I have to say so, as Thomas Edison once said. So we have to execute promptly what we are coming up. And the last one is to care and to share. We mentioned about the open source, and we have to, whatever we are coming, we have to try our best to share this to as many people, as many countries as possible in order to strengthen ourselves during this challenging period. So thank you very much, and I'll be very happy to respond to the questions later on.
Thank you very much. Thank you for all the contributions. So we have about 15 minutes for questions. First of all, I don't see any questions at this point of time from our participants and attendees, but you're welcome to write them. But let me first of all say that I find this panel is extremely interesting because of the diversity of the actors that are represented. We have a person from think tank, we have an innovative agency, we have a cybersecurity company, we have a big IT company. So this is really highlights the diversity of actors, and I personally represent King's College London, which is an academic institution. So my first question for everyone, in this type of situation when we have so many actors, and also when we need to collaborate probably with the state institutions that, as was mentioned by some of you, sometimes it's quite challenging to collaborate with them. What are the major factors for the success of this type of collaboration between the diversity of the actors that exist? And also what can actually contribute to learning experience from other countries? Because here we also have cases from other countries. So if I may, Tomaika, I will start with you because you kind of try to facilitate learning from different type of experiences and cases, and also you are kind of in the middle between different type of actors. What are the factors that contribute to success of this type of collaboration?
Well, first thing I would say is that you can say of multi-stakeholder collaboration in general what Winston Churchill said of democracy, which is that it is the worst possible option except for all of the other options. And this is really a moment when the stakes are too high and the task is too big to be left to government alone. You need to have civil society and you need to have the private sector involved if you want to be able to achieve good outcomes. So everyone should accept that at the beginning, and that's kind of step number one, understand that this is not something that can be done by any one sector acting on its own. The second thing I would say is it's crucial to find the comparative advantage of the parties that are going to be working together. In general, government has instant scale in a way that most other entities do not. You can reach millions and millions of people immediately. And while some tech platforms can replicate that, it's a relatively small number. The private sector tends to, in our current environment, have access to the best technological talent, and they can engage in the most rapid innovation. And civil society tends to hold a substantial comparative advantage when it comes to maintaining the trust of citizens and the trust of potential users. You need all of those ingredients together, and financial resources, obviously, wherever you can find them, in order to make these types of collaborations successful. The last thing I would say on this is we need to recognize that in order to defeat the virus anywhere, we need to defeat the virus everywhere. And so what that means is that while traditionally a lot of this work would be done in a national setting, it's crucial right now to be looking beyond borders. And that's why this panel is a very important exercise. The normal mechanisms for transmitting good ideas across international boundaries are under severe strain right now. And so it's all the more important for those of us that have access to individuals who are solving these challenges in other settings to do what we can to reach out and make sure that ideas are moving rapidly across jurisdictional boundaries so they can be utilized everywhere.
Thank you. We actually have one question that kind of also was something that I wanted to ask from Michael Stettelman that was just raised. All the speakers were talking to some extent about open source and the importance of open source. So I first would like to address this question to Heiko as a representative of a big IT company, EPAM. So to what extent the solutions that you support now should be, in your opinion, open source solutions? Because usually I understand you work with not only open source solutions, and also if you have a lot of different type of startups around you, can you see them as a competitors, or how you can facilitate collaboration with the small companies in this type of situation? So how you support open source and the collaboration with small companies?
So I think we're big believers in open source. I mean, we were generally always big believers in open source. And that is, we're actually very proud that we're one of the key contributors to major open source frameworks. Now, putting that in the perspective of this crisis, I think with all the technology solutions that have been discussed, and probably being a little bit biased, one of the core technology solutions that are currently being discussed widely is these tracking applications and so on. And we also touched on the point how important it is to have them privacy preserving, and to have the trust, or to gain the trust of the population, the citizens. And I think open source is key in this respect. Any solution that is, and you probably saw this, right? You saw this with when European countries have been discussing, or have been in the process of discussing on adopting these kind of technologies. And there were solutions out there like in Israel or in Singapore. It was, in the beginning, they were hesitant because there was always the big fear: is there non-privacy preserving code in there? Is there anything? Is there a bad data collector involved that will do nasty things with the data being collected? And I think the only way to overcome this is to really be full transparent and to have the full transparency. And open source is a fantastic way to achieve this. It's science brought to technology development. Science in the terms of there's a good idea, and it's only being and it's diffusing through the community by being challenged, and constantly everybody's trying to find the failure in it. And the only way to do this with technology solutions is to really open source them. So we do believe that this is the only way. What I want to add to this, though, and I think that is one of the things that we're seeing here at EPAM. I think we've been pretty early with the similar ideas as Trace Together in Singapore or our Israeli colleagues. The problem that we saw is how to cut through the noise. And you see that there was a race going on, and a good race going on, to actually provide technology solutions to find the virus. The problem, though, is how can you tell the good from the bad? How can you tell what is a good idea and what is a bad idea? And I think here's my personal view, and probably a discussion point to the rest of the panel. The internet, open source platforms, open communication platforms, and so on, are they really helping to cut through the noise level and to find the good solutions? Or is it, or especially in situations that we're currently facing, are they creating the noise that actually makes it impossible to identify the signal in the noise? And at that point, I'm thinking, I would think international collaboration is key. All the contributors, all the bright minds, be it in the private sector, be it in academia, they're all contributing to solutions. But in the end, there's still competition between the solutions. And I believe that a central coordination would help, at least to steer all these good efforts into something which is then really resulting into something that really helps us in this crisis. And I would love to see, as an outcome of this crisis and all the good things that are happening in the innovation space, I believe that supranational organizations like the World Health Organizations, or whatever whatever it will turn into, I think we see that in these crisis situations, it's needed to have also all the good ideas being spread via open source. But I think there needs to be coordination as well, because the worst thing that can happen, in my thinking, is that we will end up with zillions of these technology solutions, and all of them are probably great, but in the end they won't interoperate with each other, or there is too much competition that everybody's trying to push through his solution, that in the end nobody has gained anything. So that's maybe to my thoughts on that one.
Thank you. May I follow up this point with Omri, because he actually took a part in development of app which is very successful and was covered by many media, not only Israeli but also international media. So to what extent do you think that there is a problem of this overload of a number of solutions and the competition between solutions? And also to what extent you could see that the Magen app and your particular solution with cybersecurity contributed to development of apps in other places, or maybe you learned from some other solutions that were developed already? And if you believe that there is a need of some kind of global collaboration and coordination around development of similar apps in order to avoid this innovation overload and doing again same things again and again.
I don't think there's a term innovation overload. I'm a capitalist. As much as the competition as possible, get them get people to compete if it's good, if it's for honor, or I'm smarter, or I'm getting a better Bluetooth. I don't know, better Bluetooth strategy or better technology, and you still open source it, then sure, why not? There is a bit of a let's say there's a bunch of projects. I know there's some people being a bit. I know. For example, in Israel, there's a group that was maybe offended because another project was chosen. But that's the thing; people are gonna be offended, and that's fine. I mean, even if you had a better product, but you didn't open source it, then well, sorry for the language, up yours. Like it's your problem, and competition is fine. If you can handle it, then you probably shouldn't compete.
And have you seen that? Have you been approached by any other countries to help with development of their solutions? Or?
There's a lot of countries. We're not trying to do any help for development. We're advising. Okay. It's all voluntarily. So we have had a number of calls. Don't want to mention the country's name, but we had quite a lot of calls with many departments in different countries, even companies, public companies, looking at helping in this procedure as well. And we've been assisting them, and I think it was on the good side. I think it's like even there will be more than one project in each country. It's still good. In the end, we're gonna find a more consolidated product. I think Bill Gates said it the best during World War II when there was the nuclear project. They didn't know it wasn't exactly the nuclear project, but they invested a lot of money on many different kind of project till you find the best one. And I think this is what we should do right now. We're in a very bad situation. A lot of money that should have been invested, at least in the last 50 years, was not invested on any epidemic control, anything related to contact tracing. We are using tactics that were developed like 50 years ago, and then in the last 2-3 months, there's a big push. So if we'll do more push, at least in the next year or two, budget, technology-wise, we can probably find good solutions that would actually stop the next epidemic. This is the first time I know it's not quite a public, but it's on Facebook, live, but we should be happy that the epidemic we see right now, it's the COVID-19 epidemic. I know it's sad, I know some people died, but if it was something worse, there have been a lot of other cases previously in the last 10 years that, for example, Ebola could have been broken much more intensively, or SARS, or MERS, that would actually had higher death rates, but they were not spreading so much as COVID-19. So if we had something maybe with higher death rates and even more effective than COVID-19, it would have been a much disastrous stage. So if we can use that problematic stage that we are right now and learn from it and get much better on technology, government, laws, collaboration worldwide, we'll probably be better off in the future, and we might be able to prevent the real big epidemic. And when I say real, is that the catastrophe, and we see a lot of dead people on the street. It might look like that at the start, but we overcome it with COVID-19, and hopefully that will never reach now that we have this reminder of what can happen.
Thank you. And my last question is for Mariam. As a person who is kind of responsible for facilitation of innovation in your country, do you think already not only about today, but actually the day after the COVID? So how you're going actually to build on the innovation that you can see right now in order to build better future and in order to build sustainable solutions that address post-crisis situation as well?
Mm-hmm. So post-crisis situation has to, this is where post-crisis situation is where we were expecting or where we were having the forecast for 10, 15, or even 20 years, where we would imagine where the country would stand now. And as you mentioned, the acceleration has happened, and this COVID challenge has accelerated this process. So now we are integrating all of the tools, and we are learning the new ways of living, and it will not change. It will never be back as we were living like months ago, and we have to continue this way. So even if the COVID will be over, still the adjustment of the new tools and this absorption of ICT, digitalization and innovative solution will be useful. So this will be that we kind of jumped over to the 10, 15 years, and now then we have to continue the living from that way. So post post-crisis situation will be remained as with the innovative solutions, and more innovative solutions will be on board. I remember that in 2008, when we were having the global crisis, financial crisis, definitely it cannot be compared to what we'll be having this year. But by that time, some of the very useful startups have been established, like WhatsApp, Airbnb, and lots of others have been established. So I'm sure that during this process, lots of the innovative solutions will be appearing on the market, and this will be continuing the process of living the way, and our lifestyle will be changed according to the COVID.
Thank you for your comments. And the 1 hour ran really fast because I think we had a really amazing participants. I think the group that gathered today around this discussion is really a group that represents a lot of different type of actors, but it was extremely productive discussion that also facilitated the thinking not only about collaboration today, but also about the post-crisis situation as well, as was mentioned by Mariam. I really would like to thank all the participants. I would like to thank StrategEast, and I really hope that this type of dialogue will also be continued as a part of our continuous collaboration and dialogue after this discussion as well. So thank you again for everyone. Thank you for the questions. Thank you for the participants. The live recording of this event will be available later. And let's continue to innovate and try to address all the aspects of the struggle, and also think about post-crisis situation as well. Thank you so much, and have a great and safe day. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
StrategEast. Thanks to you for excellent moderation. Thanks to all panel members, and thanks for attendees. It was my pleasure to be with you. Good luck.
Thank
Stay
you.
safe and take care.